Good evening, everybody. James Hancock here, back to review the first episode of the new Seth MacFarlane show, The Orville. The first episode is called Old Wounds. This is basically a sci-fi slash comedy homage to the early days of Star Trek. It's created by Seth MacFarlane, but the first episode's directed by Jon Favreau. And this is one of those shows where I've been very curious about it for the last few months since I first saw the trailer. And after reading all the withering reviews over the last couple days, it didn't dissuade me from wanting to watch it, but it definitely made me lower my already pretty low expectations. I've got ambivalent feelings about Seth MacFarlane because once upon a time I was obsessed with Family Guy. The first few seasons I thought were absolutely hysterical. And his first few ventures at feature filmmaking I thought were pretty cool as well. Like, I really enjoyed the first Ted. I mean, all that stuff with Flash was absolutely hysterical. But somewhere around a couple of years ago, suddenly he just seemed to lose his funny bone, where both in person and in his writing and when he was directing, just all the comedy just drained out like holes in the bottom of a bucket. Ted 2, I thought absolutely sucked. The Million Ways to Die in the West, or whatever the hell it was called, I thought that absolutely sucked. It's safe to say I've kind of turned on Seth MacFarlane. Nonetheless, I love Star Trek, and I love to laugh, so I thought I'd give this show a try just to see what it is all about, especially since we do have a new Star Trek show coming out in 2 weeks. Hopefully, one or the other will be really good, but it'll be curious to see which one is more interesting, because while this show might be called The Orville, it's fucking Star Trek. The insignia is a little different, and the shape of the ship is a little different, but it's basically a lighthearted Star Trek, and I think in an alternate timeline, what actually might have worked better or served this show better would have been if Seth MacFarlane had just made a season of Star Trek. Like, basically find a timeline or a crew or an era that has no ties to any continuity of any kind, so it will affect no other show or movies or anything like that, and just let Seth MacFarlane do Star Trek, because everything about their approach to this show screams Star Trek. Every single character is like, oh, that's their version of a Klingon, or that's their version of an android. If you're a fan of Star Trek the original series or Star Trek the Next Generation, that's where the bulk of my Star Trek knowledge lies, then you'll recognize everything, even like the way the scenes transition to commercial or the way they show the credits at the end of an episode. I mean, the format is basically the Next Generation verbatim, but with just the injection of a few laughs and one-liners. But the weirdest thing while watching this was that I didn't hate it, and I was expecting to hate it. I won't say it's a good show. I won't say it's a great show. Definitely it's not a great show. It's definitely not even a good show, but it might actually have potential. Seth MacFarlane is just as annoying as I thought he would be going into it. But there's some people in the supporting cast who actually were making me at least smile, if not chuckle. Like, I was never at any point like, ho, ho, ho! I was never laughing my ass off, like having to pause the show because we're going to miss something. I don't think I actually laughed out loud once, but I was amused. I mean, there are humorous beats that are fun. And what it reminded me of, back in the late 80s, DC did this really, really fun experiment in the pages of the Justice League where J.M. DeMatteis, Keith Giffen, and Kevin Maguire did a really lighthearted take on the Justice League. There was still plenty of action, there's still plenty of thrills and suspense and all that good stuff, but there was plenty of shit-talking and good-natured ribbing and just an overall lighthearted tone that, for my money, has aged really, really well and is still one of my all-time favorite arcs in the pages of the Justice League, which is why I just kept thinking, like, why not just do a lighthearted Star Trek? Star Trek, as we all know, even if you love Star Trek, can be a little bit of a closed-off community. It can be very insular, which makes it sometimes hard for a new show or a new movie to breathe new life into the franchise because everybody's so wrapped up in their idea of what makes Star Trek unique, what makes it special to them. And I freely admit, my knowledge of Star Trek pales compared to the majority of the hardcore Trekkies and Trekkers out there. I mean, I never even saw an episode of Deep Space Nine, and I know for some purists, Deep Space Nine is the high watermark of the entire franchise of Star Trek over the last 50 years. As I mentioned earlier, I love the original series, I love Next Generation, and I've seen all the movies, a lot of the movies multiple times, and I do enjoy the new iteration of the crew, but perhaps the best way to inject new life into Star Trek is to have an approach like the Orville. They're just great little, like, subtle visual gags that are pretty humorous. At one point, they're talking to somebody on the view screen from the bridge, and this doctor they're talking to in the background, there's just this dog who's just aggressively licking his balls. I mean, it almost looks like he's eating his own asshole, just like, look, I mean, just will not stop, and they're just carrying on the straight-faced conversation, and I was, giggling while watching that, and as soon as the conversation's over and Seth MacFarlane leaves the bridge, two guys like, man, did you see that dog licking his balls? I mean, not the world's most sophisticated humor, but it was humor. Like, Scott Grimes seems like he's going to be pretty damn funny throughout the season. Adrienne Palicki, who definitely is there to be like the hot, badass action chick, even she's pretty lighthearted and humorous. I mean, she's been great in stuff like John Wick, but she's one of those actresses that I always feel like is like poised to really explode and become the next big thing, but just never quite gets there. But I thoroughly enjoyed her character in this. And there's this guy, Peter Macon, as Lieutenant Commander Bordas. He's basically Worf, but just bigger and more blocky looking. Worf always did have a lot of great humor in and around his character Next Generation, and they've basically just taken that and like tweaked it and just accentuated a little bit more, and that works pretty well. But then there's plenty in this show that doesn't work at all. There's a couple different action sequences that were so dull and so lifeless, and it's a show with a bit of an identity crisis. I love lighthearted action movies, but both the comedy and the action both have to be on point, and in the show both fall short, and so it's not a show I'm going to recommend, and I'm not even going to give it a positive thumbs up or a positive review. But I will say this, I am going to watch the next episode, and maybe I just have a morbid curiosity, but I do think there is potential in a humorous sci-fi show. Sci-fi, as much as I love science fiction, it can be a little bit dry at times and a little stately and just a little rigid. For people who love the movie Galaxy Quest, as they can attest, sometimes it is nice to mix a little levity into the overall brew, and it's just not attempted all that frequently. But my real curiosity is to compare this show to Discovery when it comes out in 2 weeks. From what I've seen in the trailers to Discovery, it looks like it has potential, but I'm not completely sold yet. I would love nothing more than to have the opportunity to have a Star Trek show this fall that just blows our minds, exceeds our wildest expectations, great writing, great acting, just basically resurrects Star Trek. Because I feel like Star Trek, more often than not, really shines when it has the television format, because it really gives you a chance to pause and focus on different characters, different ideas, different scenarios. The movies always feel a little rushed and a little overstuffed because you're trying to get each character to have an individual arc and have something to do. My hope is that the show will get funnier as it goes. I mean, it does have great little beats. At one point when Seth MacFarlane catches his wife cheating on him, she's cheating on him with a blue alien, and the guy, instead of reacting with surprise or alarm, his forehead just like squirts this goo out, and it's, you know, it's gross and it's infantile, but it is kind of funny, kind of humorous. If the show tries to take itself too seriously, it'll be a complete, total embarrassment for everybody involved. But if it evolves and grows and finds its footing, who knows, it might end up being the better sci-fi show to follow this fall. So I'm on the hook, at least in the short term, for both Star Trek Discovery and the Orville. Whether or not I'll continue to do reviews of the Orville depends largely on the quality of the show, because I don't feel like queuing up every Sunday just to bash the shit out of the show for the same reasons over and over and over again. If you were on the fence about watching the show, I hope this review at least gave you an idea of what to expect. If you've read all the withering criticisms out there, I'll just say that perhaps this show is not as bad as all that, which I know is not a compliment, but there's at least some potential. So that I will concede. Thank you so much for watching this channel. I hope you'll consider giving my channel a subscribe. If you want to talk more, leave a comment in the comments below, or you can hunt me down on Twitter at Colbrax. And I'll be back later this week to review the new Darren Aronofsky movie, Mother, which I'm very excited to check out. But thanks so much for watching. Talk to y'all soon.